Hello there, welcome to Nerd.World Films and the beginning of a new series of episodes for this channel, with the new series coming on Amazon Prime about Lord of the Rings. I felt it was time I revisit a franchise that I bloody love but don't often ever really cover on any of my channels. And obviously Lord of the Rings. Now, this being Nerd.World Films, I will point out that although the books are awesome, I am going to be following movie lore, as I suspect that the TV series, although obviously it will draw on the books, we know there's a lot of original content going on in the show, but it's also possibly going to link to the Peter Jackson movies, and if it doesn't, I've heard whispers of like a reboot of sorts through Amazon Prime. Who knows? Hopefully that's not going to happen, but anyhow, so that said, please like, share, subscribe, comment down below while we get into the lore of orcs from the movies of Lord of the Rings. Now, to begin, the orcs were originally possibly elves. This I'm sure you have heard many times across many channels talking about the Lord of the Rings, and although it's never actually completely stipulated that that is the case, it is believed that they were made in mockery of elves. It's likely that Melkor, in his early forays into Middle-earth, he corrupted, twisted and tortured elves into making them into orcs. Now, there is a question that I often have heard, and I've heard other people talk about it, and I'm curious about it myself and what people's thoughts are on elves are basically immortal. Now, as orcs are a spin-off species from them, in a sense, are orcs also immortal? I'm curious to know what everyone's thoughts is on that in the comments below, so let me know, because I personally would like to think they are, but they're so vile and corrupted and violent that their lives are so wretched that they don't manage to gain immortality in that way. Or others would argue that perhaps the gift of life sort of given to the elves, the sort of longevity they have, is a divine gift, and as the orcs are no longer a divine creature, they don't deserve it. But then again, I never believed that Eru Ilúvatar was that kind of a malicious being. Orcs may be twisted and corrupted and vile creatures, but they still are what they are, deep down. Anyway, as we know, Melkor was the sire, effectively, the guy that trained Sauron. He was the real big bad of Middle-earth, of early Arda and all the rest of it. Him and his little followers, the Balrogs, and the other Maya were basically, they were the rebels, they were the bad guys, and they went on and they created the orcs. Now, the orcs were present for pretty much every campaign that Melkor would undergo in Middle-earth, from the early wars against the elves, to later just general conflicts, to them effectively becoming his main foot soldiers of his armies when he took control of Mordor. They would serve him through the War of the Last Alliance, right the way up until the War of the Ring, where afterwards, with his death, they would seemingly disappear from the world. Although why exactly that is, we're not sure. It's not clear if they existed purely because of his dark power. I don't think that's the case. I just think that without a Dark Lord to lead them, they became directionless, and between their infighting and constant squabbling with others, they probably just got wiped out. Would be my theory, but again, feel free to tell me if I'm wrong and tell me in the comments below. Now, in the films, which, as again I'm stating, I am mostly following film lore, I can assume that their basic history and backstory is going to be basically the same, but the new series, which is set obviously in the Second Age, could tell us something completely different. But as far as we see, orcs breed like rabbits. Now, although we never see anything that we can confirm to be a female orc, they are believed to exist. They don't just spring out of the ground, we don't think. But the orcs, however they reproduce in very large numbers, and they reproduce quickly, which they need to do because they're constantly killing each other and being killed by others in the endless wars. We see them marching on anyone that they're told to go against. They're told to fight humans, they'll fight humans. They're told to work with humans, they'll work with them, but they are generally vile, wretched creatures, quite willing to eat a hobbit alive just because they're a little bit hungry. At least the Orcai, the good table manners, to maybe try and cook their food, or at least think about it. Maybe. So that actually brings us on to the next thing about orcs. Now we know that they shy away from the daylight. They generally don't like it. They reside in Mordor because Mordor is constantly sheathed by cloud, by Sauron's dark powers. He keeps Mount Doom billowing out smoke. He generally keeps the whole area in shadow because orcs don't particularly like the light, which, if you know Lord of the Rings lore, it's all about the two trees and lighting of the world and blah blah blah. Vile things hide in the shadows. They like the dark and they fear the light. Orcs are not like the ogres. They're not hurt by sunlight per se. It doesn't kill them, but they don't like it, so they shy away from it, and they tend to not move around too much during the daytime, and if they only do it if they absolutely have to. From there, though, we spin off into the other gnomes, like half-orcs, which we really try not to think too much about. There are other species, shall we say, which we'll cover slightly here. Now, in my opinion, Tolkien never intended for the orcs to be different species, but they are portrayed a little differently on screen. Now, the half-orcs are never really seen, to my knowledge, in the movies, but they do exist, and they're basically half human, half orc, which again we don't want to think too much about, especially which way round that was. Anyway, they were so human-like generally in appearance that they could pass for an ugly human. Just about. And they basically would then work as spies. That's how they sort of got around. And they were supposedly bred probably with mountain men or general wild men around. So then that brings us on to Gundabag Orcs. Now, in the movies, the Gundabag Orcs are shown as being larger, stronger, and more ferocious than your typical orc. But I don't think this is indicative of saying that they are genuinely a different species. I think they are just regular orcs. But the orcs of Gundabad are older. Far older. And there are even a few of them whose names, such as Azog the Despoiler, is even known to the tongues of other races, such as the dwarfs, of course, after they would take Khazad-dûm and take up residence in Moria, and all the other hideous things they would do. His name, Azog, was then known to the other races, to the other folk of Middle-earth. Few other orcs would basically earn the infamy of having their personal name known beyond their clan, beyond the borders of Mordor. No one would care enough to, but a few did, and the Gundabad were amongst the most. And generally they were larger, stronger, more ferocious, but I believe this is because they are a less feral, less inbred version of orcs. I think they're a more pure strain that have stayed more true to their heritage. They're probably how orcs were when they were first bred by Melkor, not the slothy savages controlled by Sauron that live in Mordor. And I think that's meant to be what the distinction is in their kind. My personal opinion, but that's what it looks like, especially when you look at the movies. Now, the goblins are another one. Now, Tolkien is known for using goblin and orc interchangeably. They're the same to him. They're not distinct species. They don't have differences. But in the films, we're going to cover what the film shows. And in the films, the goblins and the orcs probably are still the same race. But the goblins are mutants. They're feral. They're severely inbred. Basically, I suspect, and I think I even do believe this was the movie maker's intention, was to show that the goblins of Goblin Town were heavily inbred orcs. Orcs have a much smaller gene pool. They've stayed away from all the other orc clans to such a degree that they're not even participating in the War of the Ring. They don't leave their mines, they don't leave their homes. They stay in Goblin Town and they rarely leave. They kind of just stay there. So they are, in effect, a very feral, crazy, insane version of the orcs. They're not as large typically, they're not as strong typically, and they're not as intelligent typically. This is due to their isolationism, both from greater orc society, their distance from Sauron, obviously, and also their lack of interaction with other species. The orcs are not stupid. They're capable creatures. They're just not as capable as humans or elves, and they need someone to direct them. And the goblins are kind of a reflection of what the orcs will do if there's nobody's around. They devolve into almost bestial-like creatures. So there are all the orcs we see in the film universe. Mostly you see the atypical orc that comes from Mordor. They're the most common we encounter. The Uruk-hai come a little later. The Uruk-hai are technically a different species, and I'll probably do a different video on them, but basically Uruk-hai are meant to be a crossbred species, but in the films they're shown to be somehow conjured by Sauron. Originally, Uruk-hai were not created by Sauron. They were created by Sauron, or possibly even Melkor. But Sauron would breed them. But he seems to literally birth fully grown Uruk-hai from the ground, even allowing the first one to kill the first orc it encounters. Which, the orcs look on in horror, but Sauron looks on in, that's my boy, doesn't he? God, Christopher Lee was a good actor. Anyway. Those Uruk-hai in these films are not the half-breed species that are meant to be possibly half-human. They are noted for being not bothered by the sun. So he's effectively, Sauron was supposed to have crossbred them with humans again to create a stronger species. Basically is one interpretation of it anyway, but in the films, my feeling was that Sauron was using his magic to create new orcs somehow, and he was creating the Uruk-hai, a superior breed, probably more akin to what the Gundabag were like, but they were even more immune to the sun. They were physically stronger, they were smarter, they were more durable, they could run for longer, and most importantly, they easily traveled during the day without it being a problem. They didn't tire easily and were much more ferocious in battle. They were an army worthy of Mordor. Which the orcs, orcs are idiots. Half of them probably spend their lives just trying to not get eaten by spiders. So anyway, there we have all the different kinds of orcs we see in the films. There are a few individuals who I might do individual videos for of their histories and their stories, which I will have to draw on a little bit of the books and appendices and other notes and things, but generally I'm going to stick this to what we see in the films. And the orcs are your blanket bad guy. They're literally irredeemable in the films. They're never shown to be compassionate, sympathetic, or anything else. They have no honor, nothing. And I think we're even supposed to feel some kind of empathy for the one that gets its head cut off after in the Hobbit movies, after he'd been promised his freedom as long as he cooperated with the elves. Well, Legolas, we'll let you go. Nah, it doesn't. We'll cut his head off. He's an orc. He's not. They don't even think that they're worth bargaining with. So, they are literally these just blanket. They're the stormtroopers of Lord of the Rings. Only dumber. Humanity first. So, there we go. If you made it all to the end of this video, because this is now coming in the end of this video, thank you for watching. Like, share, subscribe, and comment down below what you think. Really, I'm genuinely curious about people's opinion on whether orcs were genuinely immortal. Because you'd think theoretically they should be, because elves were, but were they? Or was it just a divine gift of the Valar or Eru Ilúvatar for the elves to be immortal? So orcs is a corrupted mockery of them, couldn't be? Because remember, Melkor couldn't create life. He could only twist it, corrupt it. He couldn't actually make new life. So it's like how ogres are probably a mockery of Ents, things like that. He couldn't create something new, but he could create something out of something else that already existed. And that's how we ended up with orcs. So let me know in the comments below what your opinion is on that, and whether or not that's a lore you think they're going to follow in the new series, whether it's something you think they really were striving to reaching at in the movies, or hinted at, because I don't think they ever particularly did. But there you go. Like, share, subscribe, comment down below, and thank you for watching. Bye bye.